Karoline Leavitt is not very good at her job. Her lies are always backfiring, blowing up in her face, or she just gets caught and melts down, which is why I was so excited for today's press conference, because there was no getting out of this one for Karoline. There was no North Korea-style propaganda deflection. She had to respond to real questions about a real crisis. And when she did, of course she lied, and of course she got caught and immediately panicked. We're going to get into it all, but first, I want to start where Karoline Leavitt did, with an announcement about the timetable of when Donald Trump will be making one of the most important decisions of his presidency, and what she said is just so stupid, it won't surprise you.
Now, regarding the ongoing situation in Iran, I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision-making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks." That's a quote directly from the president for all of you today.
We did it, ladies and gentlemen. We are 2 weeks away again. Welcome back. Welcome back 2 weeks. 2 weeks from this day, we're getting the healthcare plan. We're getting the infrastructure plan. We're getting all the foreign policy decisions. We just got to wait 2 days. Are they serious? Like, do they think we're as stupid as they are? This is embarrassing. I feel like I'm in an SNL sketch. How many times can we possibly do 2 weeks? And it's funny because that 2 week question actually came up a little bit later, and boy, Karoline Leavitt did not like it. But of course, Donald Trump is trying to push this back. Of course, they're trying to deflect. He's surrounded himself with idiotic advisors who can't give him good advice, and he doesn't even know what he wants to do because his brain is completely broken. And he's also facing down a MAGA civil war over whatever he chooses, which Karoline Leavitt was also asked about right here.
So Rhino warmonger Lindsey Graham, he recently called on the U.S. to go all in.
That's quite the lead to a question.
Right. What's your message to everyday Trump supporters? Not the Tucker Carlsons or other big names, but everyday Trump supporters, grassroots who voted for President Trump to stop the wars, rejected this in the primary, going into another war with voting against Nikki Haley. And they want to see non-U.S. involvement in this war. What's your message?
Trust in President Trump. President Trump has incredible instincts, and President Trump kept America and the world safe in his first term as president in implementing a peace through strength foreign policy agenda. And with respect to Iran, nobody should be surprised by the president's position that Iran absolutely cannot obtain a nuclear weapon. He's been unequivocally clear about this for decades, not just as president, not just as a presidential candidate, but also as a private citizen. In fact, I have some quotes for you. In 2011, President Trump said, "America's primary goal with Iran must be to destroy its nuclear ambitions. We cannot allow this radical regime to acquire a nuclear weapon that they will either use or hand off to terrorists." In 2015, the president said, "The problem is that Iran poses an existential threat to Israel, our Middle Eastern allies, and the United States." And of course, the president has repeated that in his first term as president and his second term as president as well. That's why he was adamantly opposed to the disastrous Iranian nuclear agreement that was implemented by President Obama. And it's why he has given great latitude and given a lot of effort to achieving a diplomatic solution. But he's been very clear. Iran went for 60 days when he gave them that 60-day warning without coming to the table. On day 61, Israel took action against Iran. And as I just told you from the president directly, he will make a decision within 2 weeks.
A follow-up?
Sure.
Trust Donald Trump? Believe in his instincts? This guy? Really? I'm going to go ahead and say no. I'm going to pass on trusting in his instincts, trusting in his decision-making. He's clearly so flustered as Marjorie Taylor Greene, Tucker Carlson. We have the biggest voices, or maybe the loudest voices in MAGA, speaking out against this possible decision to go to war with Iran while Donald Trump is consuming more Fox content than ever to make his decisions. So, of course, he is going to be spiraling. And Karoline Leavitt continued to get pressed on the MAGA civil war, as we see right here.
Like that.
Thank you. To what extent is this 2 week delay with Iran the result of interventions by the likes of Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, or the entreaties of European leaders who want a de-escalation?
Look, the president hears all voices across the country, and he makes decisions based on his instincts. And he has always said diplomacy is his first option.
And is he still planning to attend the NATO summit next week?
He is, yes. We will be departing from Washington on Monday morning, and hopefully we'll see some of you there. Kayla.
Thanks, Caroline.
Again, it's no surprise to me that they're just trying to push this back. They don't know what to do. One of the core principles of the Trump campaign, one of the core lies at least, was that there would be no new wars. We're doing no new wars. And we're a couple of months into this thing, and Donald Trump wants to go to war. So, of course, MAGA is going to be furious with him. And part of the reason Trump wants to go to war is to distract from the other reasons why MAGA should be furious with him. That prices are higher. We see more chaos than ever. There's unrest at home because Donald Trump is sicking his thugs on peaceful protesters. Elon Musk announced that he was in the Epstein files. Of course, he wants a distraction. And the distraction usually comes packaged in the form of, well, we'll get to that in 2 weeks. But Leavitt was finally confronted on the 2 weeks lie, and take a look at what she had to say.
Within the next 2 weeks.
What makes you think there's still a substantial chance, is my question.
I'm not going to get into the reasoning and the rationale. The president believes that, but that's his position, and he will make a decision within the next 2 weeks.
Karoline.
Sure.
Thanks, Caroline. President Trump has said previously in regard to Russia, he's used this phrase about 2 weeks several times in terms of like, we expect like a 2-week deadline and then you give another 2-week deadline. How can we be sure that he's going to stick to this one on making a decision on Iran?
Well, in those deadlines, as you've seen in respect to Russia-Ukraine, might I add, these are two very different, complicated global conflicts, as you know, that the president inherited from our previous incompetent president in the weakness of the previous administration. And the president has spent a tremendous amount of time and effort cleaning up these crises that were caused by the last administration's just complete dereliction of duty on the world stage and American weakness. Now we have American strength again. With respect to Russia and Ukraine, because of that American strength and the president's leadership, we have seen these two sides engage in direct negotiations. And the last time the president said 2 weeks, you saw Russia and Ukraine have direct negotiations for the first time in years. And so the president is always interested in a diplomatic solution to the problems and the global conflicts in this world. Again, he is a peacemaker in chief. He is the peace through strength president. And so if there's a chance for diplomacy, the president's always going to grab it. But he's not afraid to use strength as well, I will add. Francesca.
Thank you. Please, every time they say 2 weeks, just ask them, what happened the last time you said 2 weeks? Have we ever successfully landed like the 2 weeks? I feel like this is some gymnastics trick that they warn you that like no one's ever been able to accomplish. The 2 weeks away, you just can't land it. And it's like it's some ridiculous 70s movie. I don't know, but like we've never gotten to 2 weeks. Please press them on this. I don't know why the press refuses to do their job when Karoline Leavitt is presenting the most obvious lies. I'm glad that reporter did, and of course she crumbled and couldn't answer, but this is all we've been hearing on everything. Donald Trump is not the deal maker he promised to be. He's not the peacekeeper he promised to be, but anyone with a working brain could have told you that, especially because Donald Trump himself doesn't have a working brain. And that was all broken down by Lawrence O'Donnell in a clip I want to check out right here.
Well, if Donald Trump gets dementia, how will we know? Donald Trump's mental decline, which is more and more obvious, started from such a low level of mental processing power that it's hard to track his decline. It's from low to lower. And then there are days like today when Donald Trump asks himself out loud in public if he is allowed to appoint himself chair of the Federal Reserve. Now, it may be tiresome to hear, but we must not grow weary of making the point that no other president was ever capable of saying anything as stupid or as indicative of dementia as that. Am I allowed to appoint myself chair of the Federal Reserve? And we must not grow weary of reminding ourselves what the White House press corps would have done if Joe Biden ever said anything like that, and how big the headlines would be in the next day's print editions of the New York Times and the Washington Post and every newspaper in the country. Because if we grow weary of making the point of how singularly stupid and possibly clinically demented Donald Trump's statements are, then we will become part of the normalization process of those statements, which most of the American news media has unwittingly participated in. And 14-year-olds in this country will think it's perfectly normal for a president to say those things. And on a day when the President of the United States is reportedly in a meeting in the Situation Room where he is trying to decide how much to support or fully join a war that he opposed a week ago, it must be reported as part of that very same story that the person who is supposed to be in charge in that Situation Room meeting, the person who is supposed to be the decider in chief, as George W. Bush put it, in that meeting doesn't know if he can appoint himself chair of the Federal Reserve, and some of the highest ranking people in that room with that president also don't know the answer to that question. Pete Hegseth has no idea if Donald Trump can appoint himself chair of the Federal Reserve. Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump have no idea that Donald Trump doesn't even have the legal power to fire the chair of the Federal Reserve, and he also doesn't have the power to unilaterally replace the chair of the Federal Reserve because it requires a confirmation vote by the United States Senate. That's how small the brain is that is sitting at the head of the table in the Situation Room deciding just how much the United States of America should participate in the war between Israel and Iran, that Donald Trump all but promised his voters could not possibly occur on his watch. In fact, that's exactly what he promised. Donald Trump spent his entire presidential campaign saying Vladimir Putin would not have dared to launch a full-scale war against Ukraine if Donald Trump had been president. Donald Trump spent his entire presidential campaign claiming that Hamas would not have dared to attack Israel on October 7th, 2023. Donald Trump promised no wars. If he got elected president, Donald Trump promised he would solve and end Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine. On the first day of his presidency, Donald Trump promised he would bring peace to the Middle East, the entire region. On the first day of his presidency, and then once in the White House, Donald Trump began promising White Lotus-style beach resorts in Gaza.
I feel like Lawrence is one of the few people in the mainstream media to actually want to be covering the clear cognitive decline that Donald Trump is in. And it's so important we talk about it right now as not only conflict breaks out in the Middle East, but it seems like Donald Trump is flip-flopping on every issue in his administration, which only leads us to believe there are battling sides in the White House attempting to seize power. We've talked about that with Stephen Miller, but it must go deeper. And we need to know who's actually running the country as our president runs it into the ground. And we're going to be covering that on this show. And if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video. And if you stuck around to the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.